Hey, it's great to welcome you to this week's webinar. I'm here with Olaf, and we have two incredible guests, Do School advisor and expert Greg Wacks and our very own Brad Richards between New York and Berlin. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. And this week we're talking about e-commerce, digitization, online retail, when we're thinking about our inquiry into how can purposeful retail actually look like, what do we mean by it, and in how far can the future of retail be one that is mindful of one planet, that is mindful of sort of our communities, our societies, and social impact. Could I ask you just to get going to give a very brief introduction, sort of a few sentences about yourselves, Greg? I know that's hard in a few sentences.
Oh, no, it's very, very easy. I'm more than happy to do it. So in a nutshell, I was a TV producer for about 15 years, largely Viacom, MTV, and VH1. Back in the relevant, really highly relevant years of MTV back in the 90s and early 2000s. I transitioned into the sort of the startup world and then the brand world, and landed at Snapchat for 2.5 years, where I ran a global team called Creative Strategy there, and left, and then sort of went about my way and found myself at a new and innovative technology company called Emoji, soon to be called something else very soon, but overseeing content and creative in the messaging and communication space, which is super exciting.
Awesome, and we'll get to that in a moment. Brad, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Florian. And for me, I kind of come from a classical kind of product management background. I'm originally from Canada. Started my career in Portugal for 3 years, leading up as a mobile product manager for an app studio out there. Moved to Berlin, where I was overseeing Polaroid's mobile strategy and kind of a merger of like IoT and tech with their cameras and digital platforms. Then bounced around a bit, did some music work with some great companies like Magix, did some work with Universal. And then for 3.5 years, I was one of the founding members of Daimler's innovation team of Lab 1886. And as of January 15th, I am leading up the innovation strategy with you at the Do School. So that is me.
Cool. And it's great to also have Olaf on board, who's sort of heading the whole initiative around purposeful retail. So let's get going. We'll not take more than 15 minutes of your time. Just very briefly, what we're really curious about is, there's this whole narrative about e-commerce killing the store. I think by now there's sort of a new story that it's not going to be about either or. It's about sort of a better immersion of the customer and having a nice sort of interaction. How's that going to look like? Do you agree with that? Is sort of e-commerce going to continue to grow, the store sort of continue to decline, or how's that going to look in your view in the coming years?
Yeah, Brad, you're probably the expert on this, so I'll let you lead the way on this one.
For me, I definitely see a merger of it, but I don't think it's either or. I think that consumers have to find a balance. Because there's just too many statistics out there with regards to just how customers are appreciating garments in stores in comparison to e-commerce online. E-commerce has a $400 billion problem a year in refunds. So that rate is much lower with in-stores experience. So for me, it's not either or. It's really a balance between it and leveraging the technology.
And how would that look like, or how would that balance look like?
For me, it would just be redesigning the store as a whole. So there's a lot of new ways, a lot of pain points that can be easily solved, like technologies to change the checkout processes. So using security tags, using RFIDs, using low-wave Bluetooth to actually buy and purchase garments. Other things like that is, using different materials within stores if you have to, but it really is a hybrid of both. I don't think it's ever going to be either or. I'm not that dystopian when it comes to this e-commerce world is taking over how we consume.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree. And actually, interestingly, if you think about the way Brad positioned it, you went right to fashion, right to apparel, yeah. which is interesting, because that's actually what I was going to say, which is when people think e-com, the majority of people go right to retail, to apparel, to this sort of world, right? And I think that where we're seeing the most innovation in this, let's take Amazon out of the equation, right? We're not even going to discuss Amazon. Let's just put them over in a box on the side. But if you look at sort of just like, smaller, when I say smaller, meaning, more sort of independent companies, The apparel business and the fashion business, I think, has always been the most innovative in this space. And interesting, what I would say is it's not an either or. If anything, the demand for consumers to have a better experience mobily and online and in different ways is actually fueling a much more sort of laser focused retail experience, where the experience is becoming less of a ubiquitous thing and much more of a specific experience in different markets that feels very custom and very experiential. So if you think about kind of like the core consumers these days, that are ages, maybe 18 to 34, which is typically kind of like your largest demo, experiences and experiential anything is exponentially more important than people in, say, my generation and older, where we're a little bit more, old school brick and mortar, and like e-com is something that's sort of a novelty to some extent, or not novelty, but maybe secondary. Experiences and feeling really sort of important and belonging in an experience in a retail environment is something that's very important. So I think what's happening is that companies are honing in on what they're doing in like the digital and social and mobile space, but they're starting to kind of refine their in-store experience so that maybe there's fewer, but it's better once you get there.
Can we follow up on that, or sort of make that a bit more specific? So there's, as you said, there's people who argue that we spoke to, say, with e-commerce, brand equity and sort of purpose has become much more important because that's what actually attracts customers online. Do you guys agree with that? I mean, Greg, especially, sort of that's your world. Do you think that that's more important than price in the future, is sort of what kind of stories that you can tell?
Yeah, I think 100%. I think that the companies that are doing it really well are leveraging like a multi-channel approach. It's not just like, oh, we're going to build a Facebook page, right? They're doing things that are super innovative. I mean, I think Snapchat's a great example of a company that is not necessarily getting as much press for the things they're doing, but they're doing some really innovative things with their Lens product, which is an AR experience where you actually, and there's a whole case study, they won a Cannes Lion last year, or I think maybe one of their partners did, around an activation they did with Nike, where you physically had to be at these very specific basketball courts, and then they did a sneaker drop. If you were in the geolocation of that actual experience. It was all done through this AR experience, and then it was a shoppable thing. It was like bananas, and it was super interesting and innovative, but just that buzz alone from that gave them some kind of, sort of wind at their sails and helped draft, sales in much larger sense.
Is it then just about being sort of, gimmicky and creative and having a few fun ideas, or is it a case that you believe that actually sort of purposeful causes, good storytelling, sort of the Warby Parkers of the world, buy one, give one, is that really going to stick with customers, or is it just about the next hype and the next gimmick, and it's not so much about the how thorough a conviction is that a brand has?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm going to sound really cliche here, but it's all about authenticity, honestly. Like, I think if a brand, has to look at like kind of the marketing funnel, right? And at the top of the funnel, it's all about awareness. And at the bottom of the funnel, it's about conversion, right? It's about purchase. So somewhere in that funnel, when brands are telling their stories, they want to make sure that they do things innovatively that work for their brand. I think a good example, and not in the retail space, but a brand that's really doing some interesting things is a brand like Bumble, which I don't know if you're familiar with Bumble, but it's a a dating app that is female focused, right? So it's founded by one of the sort of ex-co-founders of Tinder, who started this because she wanted a place where women went first. It's all about women first and empowerment of women. So women make the first move on Bumble. So what they've done is they've really kind of blown out everything they've done, even from like putting up their first spot during the Super Bowl this year, to getting Serena Williams as their first celebrity spokesperson, to launching a fund that is purely focused on investing in women-led businesses, and then specifically women of color. So what they've done is they've taken that core nugget of their product and they've actually expanded it out in a way that it makes a ton of sense. And what that does is it makes, people and specifically women who are using the app feel like they get them and they understand them. Even their social channels, everything is female focused. And so it's very much a comprehensive plan that they've really honed in on, and they don't just do it kind of half-assed here and there. They're actually doing it in a much more comprehensive way.
Yeah, to elaborate on that, I think that's a fantastic point. And I think also, I think Nike did a fantastic job with Colin Kaepernick with that whole ad campaign, because I think that just consumers now really want to be able to relate and have a brand that resonates with them, and showing these things like what Bumble did and also what Snap did, these kind of things. It may seem small in the moment, but I think when it comes to the purchasing moment for that user, they will then make that decision at that moment based on this feeling that they had with that brand. And I think the latest one, Nike with LeBron James and their most recent stuff, being more than an athlete, all these kind of things, these messages are really what stick. And I think that people now are kind of moving away from this impulse-driven e-commerce model where you just kind of get fed with regards to overload, and hence why there's so much returns and lack of quality, to now a bit more purposeful-driven, which then hopefully in turn drives up quality and then drives up more of like kind of brand loyalty, I think. So that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
And can you guys sort of give a few more examples, or sort of reflect a bit on in how far you think through that sort of blended approach of online and offline, there's a different way of connecting with the customer than it used to be the case?
There's this great startup called Everlane in the States. They do a fantastic job of simply of communication and information. I think it's a good job of just showing the pipeline and the hands that touched it, and this overall message and the journey of where this product came from. It comes from from the production to the consumer. So these kind of products that also tell a story about what they do. So it takes the online perception of it and the online experience to the actual, when you get the physical garment, that this is the journey that this product went on. So that's just one quick example that kind of came to my mind.
I would even, building on that, Everlane's a great example. I think Shinola is another example. If you don't know them, they're a watch company. So they started as a watch company, and a couple things about them. Number one, their price points are reasonable because they're selling a nice quality product, but it's not, thousands of dollars. They sort of max out, I think, at like $1,200. But more importantly, it's all about Detroit, right? It's about the city of Detroit, which, if you don't know anything about the city of Detroit, it's been kind of the butt of a lot of jokes in America in the last couple decades, because it's just, as the sort of auto industry got disrupted, Detroit really fell on hard times, and it was just sort of very run down. There's been a resurgence, and Detroit has really sort of come back up to a place where there's some innovation happening. And Shinola watches are made in Detroit, and they're American-made products with American laborers, made in an American city. And so what they've done is they started to expand that messaging out. And this is a sort of parallel to Everlane. They start making things like headphones and leather goods and turntables. And they just opened a hotel in Detroit, which is it's incredible, because you've seen this. And I think, Florian, this sort of proves that point, that when you do something well and you have a purpose, right? And their purpose is really about empowering the American worker and making people feel good about buying their products. Let's not, sort of dance around. They're in the business of making money, and they're a luxury goods product. But by doing this, they've been growing and growing and growing to the point where they now have a hotel in Detroit, in an area that was previously distressed, that just opened. It's beautiful. It's a great story, and it's really interesting to see where that company will go. But I think that really, lines perfectly with this message of having a purpose and having some sort of drive.
Mm-hmm. What I find really interesting, I mean, you mentioned Nike, but other than that, it's all about new companies, right? And companies that actually, in a way, use that way of that storytelling and that purpose-driven approach to actually build a customer base. So do you guys have the feeling that also for the established bigger brands, sort of this way of the growth of e-commerce, this new way of storytelling is actually a motivation to become take more of a position and become more purpose-driven? I'm trying to ask whether is there actually positive impetus in there, or is it in the end just about them, getting the next agency on board that just drives a good campaign?
I mean, Walmart, and this may be weird, but Walmart has been actually a quite big leader with regards to packaging and really changing their overall strategy with sustainability and stuff like that. So I think it comes to a point where as a large company that is a staple in economies, like IKEA, for example, and Walmart, these companies will have to adapt, because the goal in the end is all these companies that sustainability and purpose is it just makes sense in the end. It's
Well,
just like how you do it.
I would even sort of point to, no, go ahead. I was going to say, I would even point to, getting away from, we're talking about retail, right? We're talking about companies and products. But if you think about Apple, okay, one of the things that I think is worth talking about them as a business, everybody knows about their products and just their innovation, privacy. They have been since day one, right? Privacy has been at the core of that business, and they stand for that. That is their purpose. That is one of the most important tenets of that business. It's why consumers feel comfortable with Apple. I mean, and they're just continuously innovating with this. And if you look at sort of what they're doing now with the Apple credit card that they're launching, there's so much around it that is very much about privacy and security and, things that I think if a brand tries to sort of do that, and Facebook is having a world of hurt right now, trying to shoehorn in privacy into something that was never there to begin with, they're having a tough time because it's inauthentic. Apple has been doing this since the start. So it's just building on what they're doing from a purpose standpoint, and they're executing on it really well.
Yeah. But that's a great thing. So I briefly want to follow up on this. So if you're a big brand, can you actually try to redefine that purpose and sort of, the question on authenticity is in how far can I tell stories or build content that will actually be believable? And if I'm now saying, I really want to make a push on sustainability, I want to start making a push on social impact or my community that I'm involved with, in how far is that believable? Or how can you make it believable?
For me, it's believable when it comes, I would hate to say this, but like out of nowhere. It doesn't come as a reaction. It's not a reactionary thing like Facebook did. So Apple had that great example with the US Supreme Court where they tried to unlock that phone. They just really stood their ground and said no, because they stood for it. So I think that a company, if they want to change down this area, they have to do it in the sense of, we're changing our views and we have our reasons, but it's not a reactionary, like a PR nightmare. And I think that's where these large brands get caught up in it, is that they wait too long where they knew the problem was there, and then until it got a spotlight shown on it, that's when the issue arises. So I think that's being proactive.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that there's tons of examples of brands who try to have this knee-jerk reaction to it, and they fail miserably, because in this day and age, you can't do something as a brand without any kind of backlash from your consumers, given all of the channels that consumers have to sound their voices at this point.
It's just too quick. I mean, for example, Ellen DeGeneres just did a post about banning some hotels due to the owners, and it's viral, instantly viral. These kind of things, you just can't fake consumers now. They're educated much more than before.
And are there any larger organizations, can you think of any larger organizations that have managed to do that transformation in an authentic way?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily want to call out any particular brands, but I think that I think the reason why it's easier for brands that are not established is that they have a lot more to gain and a lot less to lose, because there's nothing there, right? When I've seen it work well, the only example that comes to mind, it would be, a brand that's a little bit more of like a parent company that maybe launches a new line that stands for something else, and they can be very quiet about their connection to that brand, but they're able to sort of do it in the sense that it's something new for them. And then they can own that and sort of go with it there. I do think it's very challenging for brands to do sort of wholesale changes on that level from a standpoint of like purposeful doing and, kind of as it pertains to what the work of the Do School is doing. But it doesn't mean you can't start to incorporate pieces of it and start to make change from within gradually, but it is very hard. And
I couldn't agree more. There's these use cases that dip their toe in the water with it. For example, like IKEA, they did that huge reorg about their light bulbs, for example. Huge initiative, did a lot, but on a larger scale, IKEA is so much more than just light bulbs. And Walmart did a huge thing around sour cream, the same thing, where they use completely sustainable products, the shipping, they had the whole value chain mapped, and they proved that this one hero product, let's call it that, could be done in a completely sustainable way and a business and have good business economics behind it. But as a whole, they can only do this on a small scale. So it is a gradual thing. I don't think they're not doing it. It's just, it's so difficult to move this ocean liner like to that level. It's just
totally
difficult. Yeah.
Awesome. Our 15 minutes are up. I don't want to time. Is there something that we should have talked about that we didn't?
The only thing I would even just add to this, just to kind of lighten it up a little bit, less about sort of like purposeful doing and kind of social good, more about innovation. I think we'll go back to Nike for a second, which is a company that obviously has a ton of really great sort of examples. There are some not so good sort of qualities about Nike, which I won't sort of touch on. There are definitely some things there that, I think probably could be fixed. But one of the things that they did interestingly was they launched this app. They created an app called Sneaker, SNKR. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but it's the Sneakers app. And it's essentially a standalone app that's different than like the Nike app. And it basically was born out of, I think, an insight from a different company that they were pulling from. So you look at a brand like Supreme, which is a fascinating brand. I mean, absolutely fascinating.
That could be another hour just about that.
That's a whole, that's a whole, and the whole, what I call the culture of the drop, which is a really interesting, sort of fascinating thing. But the scarcity, right? This sort of scarcity effect and the sneaker culture, Nike created its own standalone app to basically compete and say, look, we do cool things. We can do sort of custom collections. We can do scarcity, and we can do it better than you because we're going to randomize the process and give you the ability to, and if you're not someone who can fly to New York and stand in line on Lafayette Street for a day waiting for a new Supreme drop, you can just, on your phone, you can basically put your info in and it randomizes. And if you get selected to buy, one of these custom pairs or these limited editions, you're golden and you don't have to leave the comfort of your couch. So I think, innovation happens all over the place. I think the key is, as far as it pertains to the work at the Do School, there's a lot of examples where I think brands can take from and then potentially use that to start doing things that might have more purpose to it and help kind of define some of the things they're doing. That would just be my final word on this.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful final word. Thank you both so much for taking the time. As always, if our community or members want to reach out, I hope it's okay to connect you.
Sure.
And thank you so much for being so open and frank and sharing with us.
Awesome.
Great.
Good
thank
to see
you
guys. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Cheers. Bye.